Wake the Bear Radio with your host, Brandon Johnson, Chris Hurst, and Ron Powers.
The bear is growling.
It's waking up.
The sound of the roar across the nation. Wake the Bear Radio tonight is going to be hot. There is a bunch of stuff going on in the world right now. It is warming up out there in this summer and the beginning of August, and we are seeing some major revelations, major booms hitting, major uncovering happening. And man, I'm just excited to be here and talk about that tonight.
Oh, me too. You know, it is actually, just looking back, the last several months has been really pleasant to cover the weekly news of what's been happening. You know, there was a time maybe a year ago and a year and a half ago where it was just all like, oh, we're getting our butts kicked all the time. And it's just like, how much more can this be? You know, the Jan Sixers unrighteously or evilly, being treated. That's a made up word I just made up there. But, they were just being treated like crap. And every week we're saying, oh, these people are doing this and that. Now, the last several months has been like, this is being exposed. This is failing on the deep state. Deep state lost this here. This judge sided with Trump and things like that. And so it's been actually getting better and better. I've actually enjoyed it much more. It makes our job a lot easier when you get to share good news,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting, because it's a little ambivalent at times. Like you would say things like maybe if an American sports team lost something, you would be really sad. But it's amazing today. Lately, it seems like Americans are cheering on the other teams. I don't know if you saw some of the clips of this, but the United States women's soccer team who won't, they will kneel for the national anthem. They won't stand. They're dishonoring America. We kind of see some, I don't know, and I don't use the word karma, but we've definitely seen some justice play out where they lost. And you don't normally see Americans who love America booing down their own team, but we got to see some of that. It's actually pretty sad if you think about it, our one team, American team, has gotten so politically activated and so anti-America that the average Americans would boo their own team and be happy with their own team's loss. And I saw this meme. Yeah, actually, you pointed me to this meme. Team America, at least Sweden's team, actually looked like women. Gosh, that's so funny, actually.
Yeah, I know, definitely. You know what? Speaking of that, you just reminded me. Trump actually did an amazing response, and it was he was talking about how the U.S. Soccer team is really an embarrassment. They didn't respect our country. Woke equals failure. And then he said, "Nice shot, Megan." And just really, she missed the penalty kick.
Wow.
And so she just cleared the whole box. She didn't even get in. And, there's just been a lot of things, a lot of pushback with against Megan as well. She's the one with the colored hair all the time and very outspoken, very prideful. And, one of the things I heard earlier this week was, she's for the transgender, having these guys play in the women's league. And it's like, well, and I think it was Megyn Kelly who actually was saying, you've already made it when there was no men in the league, and
right.
You're safe from it because you're on your way out. You've done all this stuff. And so, it costs you nothing, but it costs all these young women that are entering into soccer and other sports. It could cost their whole career or even just a position altogether.
Sure.
When you got a guy that's got an extra, 6 inches over you and twice as many red blood cells and all that stuff. So, it was just really interesting, the pushback. But so when the U.S. failed and they lost against Sweden, it was just interesting to see the president's response, President Trump. And he's just like, you know what? Good. I'm glad you lost. You don't represent you're horrible in how you backstab our country and stuff like that.
Right.
So I think it's good. And I also think it's good that when fans stand up, it's really easy to support your own. You look at most cities, they support the home team, right? We live in the Bay Area. Oh, everyone's 49er, it used to be Oakland A's or San Francisco Giants and things like that. And so by default, people generally support their own. I don't know, it makes them feel better, but here, when you have fans that were actually glad that they lost, that tells me that they actually thought of things that were more important than, quote, their home team winning. Oh, we're great. We won.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't win. You sat in a chair, paid overpriced, and you watched someone else play, make the
Right.
money, do all the work. So it's never we. I never understood that. But, I guess we feel better after because it's their party. But people were willing to give that up saying, no, our team is horrible.
That's
It's horrible
true.
because look what they do. And so they were willing to stand up for principles that were higher than what's very easy to do. So I thought that was actually kind of a neat response, that there
Yeah.
was a segment at least that
Well,
really
and
happy.
it just points out, you go woke, you go broke.
Yep.
And it's happened with Budweiser. It happened. If you're pushing this agenda that America, you've lost the will of the American people. You've lost the favor of the American people when you attack America and put forth values that are clearly antithetical to what this country stands for. You lose supporters, and it's just normal. So,
Yeah.
anyways, but
Just the appearance even is just interesting. I don't want to judge people on their appearance and stuff like that, but
what
there's
is a
just such a
woman? Yeah.
hardness to some of them. And not the
Yeah.
whole team. It's not even the whole team, but some people have used it as a platform, and it's just no place for that, I think. People go to enjoy it. They go to get away from the politicization of things, and just enjoy the talents. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
So,
this week I got away. Me and my wife got away for a day and just went to the beach and went for a bike ride. It was our 23rd wedding anniversary yesterday. So 23 years of marriage. Super stoked. Woohoo. Go Team Johnson. And
yeah, that's awesome.
it's
That is
just
awesome. It's a testimony.
Yeah, I mean, just staying married, making a covenant before the Lord and before others, and being able to stay married is a grace of God. It's a challenge. It takes a lot of hard work, and I'm for people sticking it out and doing everything they can to fight through and to grow and to change. And I always like to tell people, marriage brings out the best and the worst in you. I tell people, Brandon, he was a nice guy before he got married. I was thinking, I'm a pretty good guy. And then I got married and realized, oh, you're kind of a selfish jerk. And then after about, 5 or 6 years of marriage, I'm like, no, I'm a pretty good guy. And then I had a kid. I'm like, no, I'm a selfish jerk. It pulls out because it draws upon you to be selfless and to think of yourself less and to focus on others and prop them up and care for other people. And so that, that's a challenge because we're by nature selfish people. So that's, but I'm thankful that my wife and I are together and we've worked hard to keep it going. And we're definitely in love and thankful. So.
Well, awesome. It's awesome to hear. Yeah. My wife and I, married a little bit longer, but, my wife is a teacher. And so she's going to be going back. She's got one more week left. So I tried the last 2 weekends to do something. This weekend, we went to a little lake actually by our place. She's never been to, and did a paddle boat for 2 hours. And I found out she wasn't really putting much effort into the paddle, and man, my legs were burning. And I finally just said, man, are you helping at all? She goes, well, why don't you just stop and let me see how hard it is? And so I took my feet off the pedals, and because there's 2 people side by side,
Right.
and she's like, oh, you know what? I haven't been doing it at all. I'm sorry. And I'm like, I could barely walk. I mean, it was for me, I don't ride a bike more than 20 minutes, half hour. And that was 2 solid hours. So I was just like, but we had fun. We had fun, and that was a good time. We got to talk out in the middle of a lake and pray about some things and really talk about some things that have been on our minds. Things that have been challenges for us, not us between each other, but just that we face together. And so it was really a good time. And so she'll be back to school and work, and probably, you get so busy, you don't ever get those times. So it's always a good time. But anyway, you notice our
Chris tonight
is Chris is not here. She's with family away, and she's out of state. And so she's just enjoying being that grandparent and parent as well. And so God bless her. And, so she's sorely missed. She's definitely one of the foundations of most of our shows. She does so much research, and she is just like everything's typed out, and she's just ready. And
And
so
not
we're
only
doing
that,
a
but she
little
does
wing
research,
style.
but she's like a major intercessor too. She's always praying. And I love about Chris is she's constantly focused on like, how can we take this to the Lord? How can we take it into the courts of heaven? How can we actually pray through this and intercede? And she's on prayer calls, 3 or 4 prayer calls a week with all over the nation and interceding. And I mean, she's just an amazing woman. So we're thankful that she is part of our team, and we miss her because she's not here today. So,
Yep.
well, you want to jump into some of the great stuff? I mean, the booms are happening, man. I mean,
Yeah, and well, let's start again with Trump had truthed about this reaction about the loss of the soccer team, but he also truthed about something else, which this slide here. Why don't you read that truth while you got it there?
Yeah, this is pretty amazing. So Donald Trump is truthing a woman named Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes. She apparently was a Department of Defense, and Ron can tell me us more about her. But she was on a radio or a television newscast in England, and she just released a bunch of stuff that we had believed was happening, but we weren't sure. I mean, a lot of the stuff we have to kind of like hold with a grain of salt because we don't know all the details, and there's a level of deniability still kept, especially with the 5-generation warfare that we're going through. But this is what Don Trump said about her. Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes is fantastic. Everyone has got to watch her interview on election fraud with the poor sap who got taken apart by her. Thank you, Don Jr., for putting this masterpiece out for the public to see. Witch hunt. So, yeah, we should play this and then talk a little bit about it. It's a fantastic video.
Absolutely. I got it loaded up. So why don't we, let me just load this up here. Yeah, when I first saw it, I actually did a bear pause earlier in the week where we take a pause and if something catches our attention, and then we start to focus in on that. And so that's exactly what I did. So yeah, let me play it. I think what we could do is, why don't we play it? And then when there's an interesting point made, I could just pause it and we could talk about it, and then I'll continue on because there's a lot of interesting points, to say the least. So
to see you as always.
Good to see you.
There's so many people putting this down as a political conspiracy theory, but actually there are real questions to be answered here.
There are?
Yeah, of course there are. Of course there are.
What he's being accused of, but what part do you think is to answer that the 2020 election is going to be litigated because of this? They've made a huge, huge mistake with this one, because even though we thought what was going to happen was they were going to go after him for treason or sedition, but they did criminally charge him, but they didn't go to that extreme. As a result, he has due process, so he can subpoena people and bring things in. Now, let me say something about.
That's a huge point right there. So
number one point.
Yeah.
I mean, saying that they made a big mistake because basically, there's this whole thing that we're going to see 10 days of darkness, and there's going to be emergency broadcasting network, and it's going to be all of the truth is all going to come out. Well, how is that all going to happen without disrupting America? Well, here's a beautiful way of it happening. They take him to court for trumped up charges, and they televise it because Adam Schiff is actually asking for this to be televised, and then all of the facts come out. I can just see this happening where all the facts come out, all the subpoena power. He's able to subpoena people, question them as lawyers, and prove that they're, basically just expose the deep state. That's huge, right?
Yeah, it's very huge. You look in the past, even, and she'll get into a little bit about the election. Do you remember when Rudy Giuliani was out there, and who else was with them? What's her name? She said, "Release the Kraken."
Oh yeah, Sidney Powell.
Sidney Powell. Yeah, there was a lot of things that they wanted to say, and they never got a chance to really present their case. They got shut down. Well, this is one of those cases that will not get shut down. I mean, he has the power to subpoena. This is a very different, criminal charges and stuff like that. So this is absolutely a new game that's being played here. So
Yeah,
let's
we should
keep
just
going.
let's just watch the video and then let's talk about each of the points after it, because it's got
This 2020 election is that Biden is the legitimate president, but he's the legitimate president of what is now the bankrupt U.S. corporation.
boom.
And that was a treaty in 1871.
We'll talk about that as well. So just remember that one, bankrupt corporation.
Well, on September 12th, 2018, Trump created an executive order. Within that, he outlined in future elections any kind of foreign or domestic interference, specifically for the 2020 election. So we say, how did he know some of these things were going to happen? Election integrity on both sides of the aisle is tough. It's really tough. But what this has done is it's opened the door for Trump to present his case.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Because what we see on this side of the pond is a very difficult situation where the legal system is politicized in the United States, which is abhorrent to us over here. So the fact that Trump can subpoena, some people saying it's a mistake by Jack Smith, but actually he can subpoena. People can actually see evidence from both sides. That's a sensible move.
Exactly. And it's a great mistake by Jack Smith that he's done that. Absolutely great. See, the thing is, think about Edward Snowden and all the information he had. Think about the fact that our military, our Department of Defense Space Force, if you think that they don't have the actual real results from the election, then you're fooling yourself.
Yeah, but what we do know with this is we're told that there are plenty of notes from people, including Vice President Pence, that there are some recordings of Donald Trump acknowledging that actually what he said in public was nonsense. That some of these states, whether he claimed he was out saying look, Detroit, it's corrupt, it's all corrupt, the results are corrupt. And that when in reality, he knew it wasn't. That's illegal.
But you know what? That's what someone's claiming, but that's not the fact. And that's not what Donald Trump really has ever said. He's been very, very clear. I mean, the issues were, for example, in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania stepped in and changed some of the election laws. Under our Constitution, it's only the state legislators that can do that. 2,000 Mules, the film that came out, what they did, they spent over $4 million tracking the phones. And the reason it's only 2,000 mules is that based on the visits to the drop boxes in Georgia, they had to have gone over 10 times. And they've got all the film for that. So the thing is that the election integrity is so different and so problematic in every single state. But that doesn't mean that the machines didn't do something, that there were some other kind of finagling, but the long and short, go ahead.
Well, it doesn't, but that's where conspiracy comes in, is it? To say, well, it doesn't mean that something didn't happen. Well, there's no evidence that it happened. I mean, there's how many court cases did the Trump campaign try to bring? Nothing's gone in his favor.
Okay, wait a minute. Everyone, the media goes, oh, there were 60 court cases that were rejected. No, there were 3. He won 2, he lost 1, 57 were never heard because they had no standing. And standing means that the person bringing the case has to claim some kind of impact or injury. So it's really, the media did that and they're great at doing that, but it was a fallacy in there. And the thing is that, I sit on a task force at the Department of Defense. And the thing is, they've got the goods. They've got the goods. And Trump knew that if he presented any of the goods early on, we'd have a civil war. That he really felt that the people needed to see how bad it could get.
Let me stop here just for a minute. There's just so much packed. I was just taking mental notes. The first thing that Jan says is that there's an executive order. Now, that executive order she's talking about is 13848. And I think it was in September of, Actually, I think I might
12th,
even have it. But
2018, September 12th, 2018. Executive
yes,
Order 13848, which is showing that he suspected, believed, or knew that they were going to try to steal the election by foreign
yes.
or domestic election interference.
So he basically set everything up to deal with election fraud right at that point. And so, and what's really interesting about it too was that it was to run out in 2021, and it got pushed out to or 2022, and so Biden had extended it from September 2022 to September 2023, coming up in the next month and a half. So we'll see if it gets extended again, but it's just really bizarre that Biden would even, extend this. And I looked that up, and sure enough, he did extend it. So it'll either be extended again or
That's
something will
interesting.
happen before that. But it is very interesting why you would do that. It makes you wonder who's really in charge. But so that's the first thing that she brings out that she did. She also brought out that the NSA, they have everything. She says, if you don't think they have everything, you're fooling yourself. And I remember Mike Lindell when he was doing his thing on look at all these packets and, the traveling, not traveling, but the traffic from China to the US during that election that night, is everywhere with the IP addresses. Well, national security is going to have that for sure. They're going to have exactly what that is. They're going to have the packets going to China and the packets being returned from China. They have all of that. So when I think she's talking about they have it all, I think it's all that traffic. Obviously, some people stuffing paper ballots in a box, they're not going to have that unless it's by, cameras and just camera work. But I think the traffic is what she says, that they got all. So, that tells me another thing that has not been really in a court of law. We've tried to present it. We had True the Vote out there really trying to make a good impact on it. She brought up 2,000 Mules. That was a really powerful. Basically, I don't remember ever hearing anybody really discrediting it. It was
Nobody did.
Could
not be refuted. It's a bunch of lies. It's all fake. It's not true. Don't watch it. That's what they said in the media. There was no good refutation whatsoever in it.
So I thought it was brilliant the way they did it. The phones pinging and they're able to track it. Basically, if you haven't seen 2,000 Mules, basically what they did is, as she said, is anyone that went to a Dropbox more than 10 times, that's how they got the 2,000. And I think if it was like down to 8 or 6, it was like 53,000 mules. Yeah. So there were a lot of people that did it partially or less than 10 times to a Dropbox. But what they did is they followed the pinging of the phone, because every phone has a unique signature, like a thumbprint in a way. And so you could tell which phone was repeatedly going to this box. And then they would say, oh, look, this phone is at this box at 11:30 at night. Oh, let's look at the camera. Oh, it's this person, this guy with the whatever, red hair or something like that. And then it's like, oh, that phone returned. Oh, it's the same guy.
Yep. And they were required to have cameras on every single box. Now, states did not do it. A lot of states didn't, but they have enough video evidence to show that this was legitimate. And like you said, there, like you were saying, there's a lot of places where people went 6 or 8 times, but didn't go 10 times. Right. So, and then also is that they would go, they would ping that they went to a non-government, 501c3 and then they would go, and then after that, then they would go to the boxes, and then they go back to this thing and get more. And they wouldn't just take 500 and dump them all in one box, because when you went to go the next day, you'd say, oh, there's like weird, there's all of a sudden 500 notes, 500 ballots in this box. So it would show that's a potential fraud. So they got a lot of people to go up to 10 times with 5 or 10 at a time. And so it didn't spark any concern. And that's how they did it.
Yeah. So I could see that there's definitely some pre-planning on the Black Hat side for that, but they weren't thinking about, the phones being pinged. So I thought it was brilliant. Maybe that was inspiration by the Holy Spirit, just to help. When we pray, many times, Lord, help us in exposing darkness, especially that verse in Ephesians, have nothing to do with the dark deeds, but expose them. When we ask, Lord, help us, it's things like that. People get inspired, they get ideas like, hey, what about this? And so that seems to be one of those things.
Well, and she said one more thing, before she went to the 2000 mule, she said, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court changed the election laws, and they violated their own state constitution. The Supreme Court's not allowed to change election laws. You actually have to have the legislative body meet and decide to change the laws. So that's a violation as well. And that was one of the big ones that Trump was pointing out. So anyways, keep going.
Yeah. Before I start, we'll cover some of the things she talked about later, because we'll pull up some other slides. I don't want to change this video. One was the bankrupt corporation. She talked about that, the act of 1871. So I'll put that on the back burner. Also, I thought she brought up a good point when that narrative. All those cases,
60 cases.
Yeah, you hear that all the time, and it's just like, really? And then she comes out and breaks it down, and it's like no standing, and she really begins to explain it. If it hasn't been heard, you really can't say, that anybody failed. It wasn't even, it didn't even make it into the courtroom, so it was shut down. So anyway, we'll continue.
That goes along with what she says about it being a horrible mistake by Jack Smith and those who have put him up to it. Because if this information now gets to go to a court and it actually goes into the public record and it's actually seen by everybody, game over. So
yeah, well, as Q said, these people are stupid, and I think they may have not been looking downline enough, and just looking right in front of their faces, like. I think some of them honestly believe they have a case. And then all of a sudden it just evaporates and they're like, what happened? I think they're deluded. And I think God sometimes gives people over to their own delusion when they reject, his promptings. Anyway, let's go on.
And that's the sense that we're getting from Trump's lawyer about what his defense is going to be. So this is all going to be based on free speech, the First Amendment in the US Constitution, that he had a right to say what he believed. And he believed that the election results were not as was put out. But the point is, if you live in a democracy and you believe in a democracy, then that means that even if you don't like the outcome of an election, you respect that, because it's a democratic vote.
Well, a democratic vote, and so therefore he should be silent about it.
No, he has a right to speak, but the issue, of course, is if he then acts to subvert that election result.
Oh, so that because you think he's being criticized because in Georgia he said, "Can you find me 12,000 votes?" Or, the thing is, he didn't try to subvert anything. What he's really done is he set up the deep state to come out, and that's why we're seeing all these things. I mean, it was revealed with whistleblowers and Hunter Biden's ex-best friend that in 2015, the head of Burisma gave Joe and Hunter Biden $10 million bribe. In 2018, Joe is on TV publicly saying that he threatened that unless they got the prosecutor fired, that he wasn't going to let them have their $1 billion in support. In 2019, Trump calls Zelensky to find out about what went on to get the prosecutor fired, and he gets impeached. I mean, we've lived with it for a long time.
We're almost out of time. I just want to pick you up on one thing you said earlier on. Donald Trump has been very clear on this. Is he a man that you believe? I mean, look, he's about as believable as a chocolate teapot, isn't he?
Look, I know that. Thank God you got the negativity in at the end and not the beginning. I can always count on you for that, always.
But it's a legitimate point to say that Donald Trump is a man who always speaks the truth. That can't be the case. I mean, it's hardly the case of any leader, to be fair, but I mean, definitely not Donald Trump.
Well, I don't know if I said everything or always, because I do call him the embellisher in chief, because he's a marketer. But in terms of telling us things, optics, you better believe that he's very much a straight shooter in terms of actions that he's going to take or what he thinks needs to be done. You know, they made fun of him because.
I'll stop there for a minute. So there's some interesting dynamics here. One of the things I've noticed is different than American TV is even though he has a different viewpoint, there's still some respect, right? And
Let her talk.
he let her talk, and she just said, you know, I'm glad you set this negativity at the end and not the beginning, like you always do. But it's still like smiling and you know, just pleasant. Where you go on The View and they're everything shy of calling each other names. Oh, he's just a racist. He's just, you know, things like that, rants and things. And so I liked that. And then he did give her ample time, didn't cut her off. And she came back with some pretty good comebacks, you know, with this. And so I liked that. I'm trying to remember the last thing she said in this segment, but it was, oh, there's so much. I keep on remembering the other stuff, but anyway, I guess we'll keep on going.
Well, I want to point out a couple of ways that they attacked, you know, their arguments. The female here, the woman on the newscast said, "Oh, well, if the vote in a democracy comes out, then you go along with it, even if you don't like the results." And she's like, "Well, so if it's stolen, he's supposed to be quiet." She's like, "Well, no." And it's like, that's the point. The point is that defending democracy is pointing out it was stolen. That's defending democracy, not going along with what everybody says happened when it's wrong. And so, yeah. And then, of course, now he moves to attacking Trump's character and his credibility, if he tells the truth or not. And I just love, she just parlays to something else.
But she also said, you know, like he's an embellisher because he's a marketer. Yeah. And that could be true, you know? And so she didn't do a hard line like, if you say this, I'll say that. It's like, yeah, there's some things that he may embellish things, is what she's saying. I don't know exactly what, but, you know, so I see that she's playing fair. She's not like taking such a side that she only presents her arguments only, but it's like, right. Okay, I might give you 10% of what you just said. And so I did think that was interesting. So
yeah, but she says he didn't act to subvert anything. You know, he wasn't acting to subvert. He was acting to expose the subversion. So go ahead.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting, the newscaster, they were talking as if what they were saying was absolutely the truth, which is, if you don't like the results, well, it's not about not liking the results. There's plenty of people that lost and they go, I lost. They know they lost. They didn't have enough votes. And yes, we're not supposed to just, you know, say we're not going to give up and we're going to hold in and stay in office. You know, if you got voted out, you got voted out. But this was not about that at all. This was completely a takeover like never seen before. A takeover meaning, you know, here's a guy that's filling up stadiums, breaking records everywhere he goes. And then he's running against someone that never even ran, really. He stayed basically in the basement. You know, I don't think there was ever more than 100 people. The streets were never lined up when he would go down the streets, you know. And so it's pretty obvious. And then to do the mail-in, you know, for the very first time, and then to quit counting votes in the middle of the night, you know, which is all addressed in that executive order that Trump made in September 2018, talking about the tabulation of votes and all that. So, yeah, let's keep going. This is good stuff, though. She's really dropping a lot of good truth bombs.
Because they assumed he broke protocol and walked in front of the Queen. No, if you go back and look at it, you will see he looked at her. She gave a wave with her hand. He proceeded. She took a couple of steps. He stopped and he waited for her to join. That was an optic to tell us that he then was going to bankrupt the U.S. corporation, because it was the Vatican, the Crown, and the U.S. that was part since 1871. And we were giving you our tax dollars. We were paying back. You know, forget this Tea Party and without taxation, without representation. We owed you a lot of money because you helped us in the Civil War. And so that is what Trump has now, he told the Queen, I'm ending this. We're dissolving this corporation. We're going to go back to being a republic and we'll all be separate. the Pope wasn't happy. You should find the picture of him visiting the Pope. It took 650 planes to remove our gold from the Vatican Bank.
I'm not very happy about it, Jan, to be perfectly honest. We could do with your money at the minute. Keep it flowing, I say. Jan Halper-Hayes, really good to see you. Thank you very much indeed.
You too.
Good to see you, as always.
Good to see you.
Well, that,
So yeah, a lot of
was
interesting
huge.
things covered there.
Go for
A
it.
lot of, yeah, you know, just even about the Queen. I have, where is it? You know, they're talking about the Queen. They're talking about how Donald Trump stepped in front, all this stuff, and really that's not what happened. And so what she was describing, I think I'll show real quick just to show, because I was like, well, what is she talking about? Him, you know, I had heard that he stepped in front of the Queen, and you know that was horrible, and you know, and they made fun of him and all that stuff, and in fact it wasn't that at all. And so got all these different, sorry about that, let me just, here we go. Okay, so they're walking, and then right here she looks at him, he looks at her, and she waves her hand in front, like go ahead. And so he walks ahead of her, and then he realizes he's in front, and then he stops, and he waits for her, and now he's walking again. So basically that's all they were,
Yeah.
that's all they were doing.
They attacked him for that. And, you know, he was being rude, or he was, you know, and she's saying, now this is interesting, you know, Jan is saying that was actually an optic he was doing. And I don't know if I agree with that. I think that might be too long of a stretch, but she then ties it to the fact that, you know, America is taking back its dissolving the corporation, which is completely separate, taking back our gold from the Vatican. The Pope wasn't happy. I mean, I think all of those things may be true, but we don't know for sure because there's just a level of deniability still. But I don't know if I agree that the stepping in front of the Queen meant anything at all. But it is interesting that she pointed out that, you know, that this thing happened where the Pope was not happy. Look at the Pope's face here.
He does not look very happy there.
It's really interesting. What she said was 650 planes of gold were taken back from the Vatican, which I don't know if, you know, how much gold that is. Some people say there's so much gold in the Vatican. It's crazy. The Pope definitely doesn't look happy here. Now, maybe it was just a moment. I don't know. But you know, the face you make when President Trump takes 650 airplanes of American gold from the Vatican back to the U.S. It's interesting. Look at this optic, though. This seems like purposeful. One, Trump is always wearing a blue suit with a red tie, red, white, and blue. Today, he's wearing a black and white tie and a black suit, which, you know, you kind of reserve those often for a funeral. Look at his wife and daughter. They're dressed.
Oh, that was his daughter.
That's his wife.
Now I see.
And that's his daughter. Now, you know, his wife is Catholic, so she would want to honor the Pope, right? But she shows up as though she's going to a funeral. I mean, this is like something straight out of like the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland, or you know, a funeral procession out of ancient England or something. She's dressed totally in black, and he's in black, and she's in black, and in fact, everybody's in black. You know, like some sort of a funeral, and he is not a happy camper.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So, you know, may or may not be true. It may not mean anything, but you know, there's a good chance it could be. That could have been an optic, you know.
Yeah, I did a little research because, you know, some of these things were so interesting, to say the least, you know, and part of the process I have for accepting things as true or rejecting things as false. I have the third category, and that's I put it on a back burner and just say, okay, I heard that. I'm not going to make a decision on that. And that's just one of those things. I do believe that there could have been money taken from the Vatican Bank and returned back to the U.S. I don't know if it's 650 cargo planes worth. You know, that might be something Monkey Works would have to prove out, you know, all these planes going. But you know, I looked into Jan's background, some of the things that she is, and she is a commentator, regular on the Great Britain newscast, which Nigel Farage, if I'm saying his last name right,
Farage,
Farage, yeah. He's a regular on there. And so anyway, she's on there quite a bit. She's been on other things, you know, the Irish Times and things like that. She's actually a Stanford grad. Go Stanford. I happened to go there at one time, and she, I think it was 2017, she graduated in political psychology. And so she really has studied the political climate, what people think, how they act in these settings and stuff. So I think she really understands the psyche of people, how they operate, you know. And I think she could probably point out a white hat and a black hat pretty well as well. She was part of the Trump transition team. And then she had claimed to be the Department of Defense, a strategist, or an advisor.
Yeah, a consultant.
So yeah, so
she was on a task force. She said she was on, I was on a task force with the Department of Defense, and then she goes into that they got the goods they can present. You know, they have all the goods. The task force has it all. You know, the Department of Defense has it all.
Right. So those are the positive things that would give it some possible credibility there. But then the things that take away from it would be, I go to a website where they interview or not interview, they do research on where did this first come up on the internet, 650 planes. And you get sources like, what was it? Charlie Ward, Charlie Ward, he's got some interesting guests on there. I've listened to Charlie Ward before, but there's quite a bit of fantastic, just a little too fantastic for my taste. But once in a while I'll listen to see what he's got. He definitely has some interesting guests that are more mainline, but then he's got some guests that are really out on the fringe. And, if anything, it makes some good hopium or good entertainment, but you got to be careful of what is actually happening. Is this actually accurate or not? So anyway, this website went through, hey, we found it in 3 places back in 2020 and 2021. And they all seem to say 650 planes. She might have got that, or she may know directly, if she's an advisory team. So I just kind of put it on the back burner as, okay, it's a possibility. I'm not going to say it is. I'm not going to say it isn't. And so that's kind of my stance on that.
Well, let me ask you this though, Ron. Don't you think that Donald Trump re-truthing this and then General Flynn re-truthing this, that there is some level of approval by her, or, by Donald Trump, and by that they're almost like, it just seems like that they're being way more explicit now about the battle. Like there was a time back where Donald Trump was interviewed, and he was saying things like, well, I don't know, they said there's this deep state thing, I don't know if there's a deep state, blah blah blah. Now he's like, we're coming after the deep state. Like it came out of his mouth like probably 5 times and 2 or 3 times in truths this week. He is being very explicit. So yeah, I feel like
adrenochrome is another example, right? It's like, a couple of years ago, people would go like, you are absolutely off your rocker in conspiracy land. And now, you get people that are fighting trafficking saying absolutely 100% adrenochrome is real. We've been fighting it. We've seen it. Jim Caviezel is one of those and he just didn't do the movie. He actually went on raids. He had to research. He had to actually, pour himself into that world to understand what he was playing. And that's why he's so compassionate. Some of the things, or passionate, I should say. That's why, he couldn't sleep for several years at night with the images he saw, he was shown, So yeah, anything is possible. Definitely. There was another part that she talked about, which was, and I wanted to get back to that, which the corporation, right? Biden is the president of a bankrupt corporation, and this whole stepping in front of the Queen may or may not have been a gesture to say, look, this is really, those that know, they knew what it meant, and not every message is for everybody, right? Some people aren't even near being ready to understand these things. They're still binge watching whatever, and so yeah, exactly. But she did talk about a corporation. So if those that in the audience may have never heard of this before, this takes me back to my Patriot days when, before the internet, actually, when I had a thick, hard book on, the the Freeman's compendium, 200 years of conspiracy and, and all that history. And one of the things they did talk about was basically what had happened was back in the Revolutionary War, or actually before that, actually the colonizing, when England and Europe sent colonizers out to colonize the New World, the bankers backed them up. I mean, these people didn't have, pilgrims, right? They didn't have any money. I mean, they could barely, put things together, not enough to have a ship and a crew and then a bunch of food and a bunch of equipment. Well, the whole making of the 13 colonies was funded by bankers. And so what the bankers did is they did a deal saying, okay, when you colonize and you get control of these new lands, we want to own those lands, and you'll pay taxes to us. And that's how. So it's not like it's in their name, but they own all the goods, they own the roots, they have the monopoly. And so what had happened is when we had the Revolutionary War and those 13 colonies rose up against England, they severed those ties. Well, when they severed those ties, they also severed the ties to the banks, and the banks are like, well, actually you owe us. We may not own that anymore, but you have a debt, and legitimately, right? I mean, if they put out all these pounds, sterlings and all that to support you, you can't just say, oh, well, we had a war and we don't know you. We wanted to honor. And so we made an agreement that we would be in debt and we would pay these banks. And so that went on. And I've been told from what I was watching, at least, and reading, is there was like a 70-year note. And basically by the time, Lincoln comes around, we still owe them. We owe these bankers, and we're in debt, and so we have to pay, and we don't have any money because we're broke from the Civil War. So who did we owe? Well, if you look at the Constitution, there is an Article 6, Clause 1, where it says all debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be valid against the United States under the Constitution as under the Confederation. What they're saying there in our Constitution is any debts that were created before the Constitution, you still have to honor them. So who do we owe? We owed England, or these banks. Well, we also owed France, because France helped pay for the Revolutionary War against England for us to break away. So we owed all of these people. So by the time the Civil War comes along and Abraham Lincoln comes and he says, we don't have any money and we need money to help win this fight. Well, can we redo the agreement? Because I can't pay it right now. And it was coming up. Well, the banks got together and said, yeah, we can redo it. We want the property of all 43 states. That's how many they had at the time. Not just the 13 original, but let's get an extra 30 states in there. Well, those southern states said, we don't have anything to do with it. We were not part of the original 13. And so we don't feel that we should be indebted, paying and risking our property for this. And so, Lincoln turns around and says, okay, now he's not getting cooperation. He can't get a quorum on it. So he decides, let's start a corporation. And that's where you see the United States all in capitals, every letter, not just the first letter of the word, but the whole entire thing. And it actually spills over into personal corporations. You and I, when you have a birth certificate, it's all in caps. You get a driver's license. If you notice, it's all in caps. Social Security card, all in caps. Everything that's government is all in caps. Well, that's a corporate entity. And supposedly, and I can't prove this, but part of basic 101, patriot, hardcore patriot, is that when you're born, that birth certificate has a value. It says you're gonna do this much value in your life, and it goes on in exchange, and it's a bond. It's an exchange bond for that person, and it's the corporation that was created in your name, and so. And it's worth something. And so supposedly when you die, the banks collect it and stuff. But anyway, that's kind of where all this stuff happened. I can't prove that part, but the U.S. corporation definitely was a corporation. And so this act of 1871 kind of solidifies this whole thing about corporation. It's interesting because the world, at the Civil War, up to that point, the states printed each of their own money. So you had like a Missouri dollar or a New York dollar. But after the Civil War, when this change happened, now you have a federal dollar that represented everything. So now the dollar or our money supply was controlled federally, not by the states. Each state was supposed to be its own nation, you know. And so that's what she's talking about, that this corporation called the United States, all in caps, did go bankrupt during Trump's time. And that was not something that Trump single-handedly said, let's bankrupt the country. This was part of design. The whole deep state, the fiat money, the fake money system, it can't live forever. If it takes $2 for every dollar it's in circulation, you have to have $2 worth of borrowing. Eventually, there's not enough to borrow to pay off. I mean, there's more debt than there is money. There's more debt than there is gold in the world. How can you really ever pay off that debt? So it runs a course and then it collapses, and they will collapse it. And when they do collapse it on purpose, there's going to be mayhem. And at that point, what's believed is, our military is going to be overseas everywhere, and UN troops will be right in here to bring peace. And all of a sudden, that's when people lose their rights, saying, you know what, this just didn't work. Look at the money system's a mess. The Constitution's a mess. They'll tell us, and they will just take the rights away and transform the country into another one world segment of the greater one world order. And so that's kind of the design. And so that's kind of what she was talking about when she was saying Joe Biden is president of a bankrupt corporation.
Yeah,
and
this is one of the things that G. Edward Griffin talks about in his book, The Creature from the Jekyll Island. He talks a bit about the development and the creation of the Federal Reserve, which is in 1913, and how, the basically the way the money has been ran in America is, fraudulent, and it's going to have to be righted at some point. And that's kind of what you mentioned. So yeah, we're kind of off subject big time, but I think the key here is that there's some major booms that this woman laid out. Donald Trump retruthed her. General Flynn retruthed her, which leads me to believe that much of what she's saying is probably true. I think the most important thing is that they have the goods. And Donald Trump has said multiple times, we caught them all. We have it all. We know them. I caught them. He said that multiple times. We've caught them. We have it all. And then, you just have people say, oh, that he's talking nonsense. So what is going to happen here is if this court case goes to court and it's televised, it could be the very thing that is the proof that the election was stolen. It would be relitigated. It would expose the deep state and all of the wickedness. And I think some places are having Donald Trump won by like 408 electoral votes, and Biden lost by like 138, and there's something ridiculous like that. I don't know. The math isn't accurate, but ridiculously over. It was a huge win for Trump, and they had to steal it. So,
a PSYOP war. I don't claim to understand it, but I know that it's pretty intense. And one of the things is disinformation can also be said to position your opponent. So in other words, you have 90% of the things that are true. Then you have this one outlandish thing, and he may support it, and they'll focus in on, oh, this is all made up. This guy's crazy. And they focus in on that, and he lured them in, but the rest of the people heard the other 90%. And then when that 90% is proven in court and people go, oh my gosh, I remember that was said. And and so I'm not saying that's what happened, but I could see that as a possibility, that even if it's not 100%, but there's a big chunk of it that is absolutely right on, it's already accomplished what it needed to. And that was, he needed the deniers to start spreading it. So people would say, oh, what is this crazy thing he's talking about? Let me listen to the whole thing. And so who knows, but I definitely believe that him retruthing it definitely gave it some validity. And he would know better than you or I, right? I mean, if anybody knows, it would be him. So, yeah. I mean, he's on the inside, right? It's about him. He knows all the treaties that have to be signed and those things. So,
well, and not only another person who's on the inside is General Flynn. And I was going to share this also, that I don't know if you noticed, but General Flynn actually published a book a book called, I'm going to share this screen real quick. He published a book called The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generational Warfare. Let's check this out. Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare, Introduction to 5GW, Generation Warfare. And it just talks about what PSYOPs are and what, that we're in the middle of World War III. This is a World War III of PSYOPs. And you might say, okay, that just sounds so outlandish and so crazy, but most people don't know this. But Barack Obama signed a agreement to do the Smith-Munst Modernization Act. And that was where the American government can use broadcast media to distribute to the American people to help them believe what they want them to believe, which we call propaganda, right? Well, the CIA, the State Department, and all these other organizations in the government have been using the Smith-Munst. The Smith-Munst Act was made it legal for the United States to disseminate broadcast information that obviously would be favorable to us to all other countries in the world except the domestic population of America. Well, Barack Obama made it in 2008. I think he signed and made it possible that you could actually do PSYOP operations on the American people. So what we are seeing happen right now is the State Department, the government, the Department of Defense, all these organizations that previously it was illegal for them to put forth propaganda on PSYOP the American people. Barack Obama made it legal. Now, they were already doing that. The State Department was already proven back during the Church Committee that the American government had infiltrated media and movies, and they had people paid by the CIA to put forth arguments and stories and narratives that the government wanted into the American population, but it was covert and it wasn't legal to do. And they said, well, we stopped doing that, but we know they haven't. I mean, even the organization called the CAA, which is an operative of the CIA, which is this academy agency, the Creative Academy Agency. This itself is actually is a paid for with government money and with your money, tax dollars, to put forth broadcast news media that favors the American population. What happens when that news information doesn't favor America? What happens when people have taken it over and they're broadcasting things that favor a deep state, but not America's best interest, and definitely not the people America? That's the challenge, is the people of America have been basically paying for their own brainwashing PSYOP for the last 100 years through these acts. So this is the type of thing that we're waking people up to, is not just to wake the bear for California, but we're waking people up to what's going on in America right now. And we are seeing a very well laid out plan. And I just want to go back to this one last thing, is that, President Abraham Lincoln said, America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it was because we destroyed ourselves. And, we have to rule our own. If good people don't rule, they will have to suffer bad people in control. So we're trying to wake people up in California. We're trying to wake people up in this nation. That's why Wake the Bear exists. So thanks for joining us tonight. God bless you. Don't just believe what the news tells you. Do your research.
That's right. Also, any other good movies out there? There's one that was Out of Shadows, and now there's one called Out of the Light.
Radio on KSCO.
That's coming. We're going to show it on the 25th.
AM dial.
Yes, Into the Light.